we're really excited. We're really excited to have Melissa Orlov here. A once-off topic that we've never had before about ADHD and relationships. Melissa is a marriage consultant and founder of the ADHDmarriage.com, and she's leading expert in how ADHD affects couples, along with being an award-winning author. She's been writing and speaking on the topic since 2007, and Melissa teaches couples and therapists and counsellors and coaches all about how ADHD impacts relationships. And she offers private counselling to couples who wish to improve their ADHD-impacted relationships. Melissa herself, she blogs for Psychology Today, and she guest writes for many other magazines. She wrote your relationships column in the ADDitude Magazine from 2008 to 2014. And also just added to the list of the many things she does, she's the author of the ADHD Effect of Marriage book, which was awarded the best psychological book of 2010 by ForeWord Reviews. So also her book, The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD, won 3 book awards, including Best Psychology Book of 2014. So we're really excited to have such an expert on the subject with us. Melissa's been interviewed frequently about the topic of ADHD and marriage by organizations as diverse as the New York Times, CNN, and the American Psychological Association. So we're hoping to learn a lot, gain a lot, and it's really exciting for us to have Melissa here on this for this webinar this evening. Now, just to give you a breakdown, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. You can chat away in the chat box, but for us to be able to collate all the questions and ask them at the end, we will have a question and answers with Melissa at the end. So by all means, please put your questions into the Q&A box. As we say, any smaller issues that are not actually questions to be answered, you can put them in the chat, but anything that you want Melissa to actually answer, please put them in the Q&A box. We will be recording, just for anyone who's wondering, we will be recording and it will be available on the website afterwards, probably in about a week's time. And there is the use of the live transcription. You can turn it off. If you right click your button on the end of the screen, you'll see the transcript button at the bottom, and you can actually turn off the writing if it's annoying in front of you. So we're going to roughly we're going to hand over to Melissa now. We're going to have questions and answers kind of from about 8 o'clock or 8:15, depending on how we're going, and we'll have questions and answers at the end. So I'm going to hand over to you, Melissa, now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I am very happy to be here. And this is a really important topic for so many families. So I am also thrilled to be sharing it with you. I look forward to answering questions at the end of the session. So I hope you will ask those questions that come up to you as I'm doing this. So I'm going to get going here. Whoops, wait. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, so very quickly, I want to talk about ADHD. You all are pretty familiar with this, but just as a very, very brief overview, ADHD is physiological, so it's not a willpower issue. It has to do with the neurochemistry and the structure of the brain, and has a lot to do with dopamine. And dopamine is a neurochemical which is part of the reward system and part of the attention system. And so you can think of an ADHD brain as reward or interest based. So as a tendency, when you have ADHD, you will tend to follow things that feel rewarding to you. Those will just be the things that you're much more able to engage with, and you'll have more difficulty following those things that feel less rewarding or less interesting. ADHD, as you all most likely know, is manageable. It isn't curable because it's something that you have in the neurochemistry of your brain. But one of the things that's really important for adults is that when you're in a relationship, it has a much bigger impact on your life than many people understand. And in fact, what is rewarding about the work that I do is that once couples are able to identify the adult ADHD and also start to be able to understand the impact, there are so many things that can be done that it's really exciting to watch the transformations that can take place. So the good news is that the knowledge about how ADHD impacts adult relationships, it can be life-changing, literally life-changing. I watch it happen all the time. One of the things that you hear from people who do not understand ADHD particularly well is that, oh, everybody has ADHD, and that's just not true. So this is adult ADHD information about what percentage of people with ADHD say they have difficulty with time management or difficulty organizing things, or impulsivity or inhibition issues, self-motivation, concentration, and focus. And you can see these numbers are very, very high, a lot different from the community. And here in the research, the general community was people who don't have ADHD and also have not been referred for any other kind of mental health issue like anxiety or PTSD or something like that. So very, very different numbers. And it's important for people who do not have ADHD. So often statistically, because so many more people do not have ADHD than who do have it, you have what I call mixed couples, where you'll have a non-ADHD partner and an ADHD partner. It's really important for the non-ADHD partner to be able to take on board the idea that this is not about willpower. This is not about the person with ADHD not wanting to be able to organize themselves better, not wanting to be able to complete the tasks that they wanted to complete, but rather that that this is part of the ADHD. It's part of the physiology of the ADHD, and that can help both partners understand that that you're actually, it's the ADHD and the responses to ADHD that are creating some of the patterns and problems that are happening in the marriage. And it's really about both of you figuring out how to deal with the ADHD, albeit in different ways. In a relationship, there's an inherent tension between the symptomatic expression of the ADHD symptoms and the expectations that people often bring forward into a primary relationship, sometimes marriage, sometimes not. But as an example, people would expect to have their partner be very attentive and very romantic. And in fact, there is a period of time when you are infatuated with each other, when in fact that probably was what was going on. This also has to do with dopamine. As it turns out, the chemistry of love is that when you fall in love with somebody, or when you meet somebody who's really interesting, your brain is flooded with dopamine. And this happens to everybody. 100% or almost 100% of people who become infatuated have this extra dopamine in their brains. So for somebody who has ADHD, whose normal state is low dopamine, what happens is that that extra dopamine covers up the ADHD and in fact helps them be exceptionally attentive. This is what I call the hyper-focused courtship phase, and it lasts for about 24, 28, 30 months, something like that. And then for 97% of people, those high levels of dopamine go away naturally. It's just part of human beings. And then you go back to your normal dopamine state, which for people who do not have ADHD is a normal dopamine state. You can pay attention to the things you want to pay attention to, and you don't to those you don't. For those who do have ADHD, you go back to a low dopamine state, which gives the symptoms of the ADHD more opportunity to come forward. The distractibility, the difficulty planning, the things that the dopamine was covering up. It can create some surprises in your relationship. I remember when this happened to my husband and I. My husband has ADHD, I do not. And it happened right after we got married. And I was completely confused because I had been the center of his universe while we were dating. And then we got married and he went back to a very highly distracted, I'm going to go off and do my stuff. state. And I was just saying, wait, what happened? This was a new guy I had never met before, essentially. And that happens to a fair number of couples, in part because the hyper-focused courtship feels so good that you may get married pretty quickly. We got married within 2 years of meeting each other. That's still within that time frame for the hyper-focused courtship. So you expect attentive and romantic, and what ends up happening is that the partner with ADHD is very chronically distracted. Remember those numbers of often distracted, example, was up in the high 90s percentage-wise of people who say that that's the case. You think you're going to be sharing responsibility for tasks and things around the home, and instead the ADHD symptoms, issues with executive functioning may mean that you're a poor organizer or a poor planner, or you have difficulty following through. You think your partner's going to be there when, at the time that you're supposed to leave, and many people with ADHD actually have time management issues. And this goes on and on. So there are all these expectations for what your relationship is going to look like, and it comes in direct conflict with some of the symptoms that define having ADHD. And so there's a lot of tension that results from that in adult relationships. And it's very confusing because most people don't know about the ADHD. And even if they do know about the ADHD, they don't make the connection most times that the symptoms of the ADHD are actually what's impacting the relationship and creating that tension. They don't think they think of the ADHD as being related to other, focus and things like that. One of the other things that happens, because the neurochemistry is different between the two of you, if you're in one of those mixed relationships, is that you're a lot more different than you think you are. So there are things you expect if you're in a heterosexual relationship: gender differences, family of origin differences, just general approach and things you do well or whatever. But there are also things that are directly a result of the ways that your brains work differently. I'll give you an example. Ned Hallowell, who is one of the top ADHD specialists in the US, says, there are 2 time zones when you have ADHD. There's now and there's not now. And if it's in the now and it's right in front of you, you're all over it. And if it's in the not now, i.e. either in the past or in the future, it's completely out of sight. I had a man who has ADHD describe that to me as like looking through a paper towel roll, right? So you're looking right through the roll, and what you can see is what's in the roll, and everything else you can't see. That is a characteristic that many people, adults with ADHD, have. You can think of it as present moment focused. It's confusing to someone who doesn't have ADHD and whose brain doesn't work that way, because you'll say, well, we need to plan for fill in the blank, putting our children through school, retirement, what we're going to be doing in 2 weeks, how we're going to spend our vacation, whatever it is. And the partner with the ADHD might say, sure, yeah, no problem, and then forget all about it because they get oriented in something else and it goes into the not now. So even just understanding that one quality of how different you are can help you be more empathetic towards how each partner works, right? This isn't about the ADHD way being bad. It's about the ADHD way being different, and understanding that, okay, so if it goes into the not now, it's kind of out of mind. So what do we do about that, right? How do we bring it back into the now at the right time? Or how do we apportion how we work together so that things that are in the far future, maybe they're maybe better for the person who doesn't have ADHD to be thinking about, and that you can split things up, things like that. There are other kinds of things that are specific to how the brain is wired neurochemically, like impulsivity. So one of the qualities or characteristics of adult ADHD, actually of ADHD in general, is emotional dysregulation. So I was at the International Conference on ADHD in 2019. The keynote speaker was talking about emotional dysregulation and how the brain creates a lot of emotional content, like all sorts of emotional content. And then the brakes on that content, the thing that keeps that content sort of under control for people who have ADHD are very weak, typically. This comes out as impulsivity sometimes. It comes out as very fast temper for some people, where you move from sort of 0 to very fast speed quite quickly. It comes out as getting angry or frustrated with things that seem smaller to your partner or to other people than they would expect you. You get a lot more angry or a lot more emotionally dysregulated than people would expect in the given situation. Sometimes it shows up as a lot of overwhelm that kind of shuts you down. So there's a lot of emotional content, but very poor brakes, as Ned Hallowell says, bicycle brakes on a race car brain. So that's one of the issues. And then there are other kinds of things that come up, being motivated by deadlines, i.e. being a procrastinator until the adrenaline kicks in. Things that feel rewarding or that you're interested in, you can do quite easily. Things that you're not interested in, you really almost can't drag yourself to do them. There's a lot of tension there. And so being able to focus on things of very high emergency or, feel very interesting, and having real difficulty with things that feel boring. So a lot of other kinds of things. Again, the more you understand about how ADHD sets up for adults, the better able you are to say, okay, so that's how you're wired. This is how I'm wired. Now, they don't always match up. So what are we going to do about that? Again, it's not about trying to fix one partner or the other partner. It's about understanding who you are more accurately so that you can start to figure out what comes next. Now, one of the things that often comes next with ADHD is actually managing the ADHD with treatment. When I say treatment, I'm speaking very broadly. People often think treatment means medications. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm speaking very broadly. And I want to introduce you to this model so you can think about treatment maybe a little differently than you've done in the past. And I will tell you that at my website, which is ADHDmarriage.com, on the homepage, there is a treatment or optimization handbook for adults. It's free. You can just download it by putting in your email address. And it will talk about this in more detail and also other things you need to know about treatment and getting diagnosed and things like that. So think of treatment as having 3 legs, like a stool. You need all 3 legs to stand up and be strong, just like a stool does. The first leg is things that change your brain. They are physiological things that have been proven in research to change the way your brain functions. And that includes medications. That's one of the things, but it also includes exercise. It includes improving your sleep. It includes mindfulness training, meditation. There are a number of different things in the leg 1 physiological treatment changes. Leg 2 is for the ADHD partner specifically, and it's behavioral changes. A very simple one would be setting alarms to bring a reminder into the now at the right time, creating lists, hanging your keys by the door so you don't lose them because you always have a habit of putting them in the same place. And there are thousands of these things, how to be more on time, etc. And again, these are for the ADHD partner. You can read books on this. There's a very good book called ADD Friendly Ways to Organize Your Life. That's quite a good one. But there's a lot of other things that you can do in that. The third leg is sort of the area that I work and teach in. which is interactions with other people. So as you can imagine, when you're as different as you are, when there are conflicts sort of inherently in your neurology with people around you, how you interact with those people around the symptomatic behaviors and sort of getting things done and all of that is actually really important. And there are many strategies that couples can do to really smooth out their lives dramatically in the interactive leg. There are communication techniques. One of my favorites is a verbal cue, where you set up a cue while you're calm and happy and able to work together about something that you're working on that you want to change. For example, trying to not escalate into fights. And you can set up a verbal cue that will keep you from doing that. My husband and I have one of those cues. We don't need to use it very often right now, but we always have it available. And our cue is the word aardvark. I know that's, I don't even know if you have aardvarks over there, but it's a very strange looking animal that usually lives in around Texas. Anyway, you would never use this word in normal conversation, right? So that's why we use it, because if my husband is starting to get agitated and I say aardvark, it's so obviously not part of the conversation that he recognizes it as a cue, and that then says his follow-up behavior when I say aardvark is to stop talking and to try to calm himself down. And my follow-up behavior when I say aardvark is to stop talking and try to calm myself down. And you can see how that would work. And I will tell you that the first cue that we tried to use for this particular behavioral change was, hey, you're starting to get agitated, which of course, the first time I used that, he said, no, you're not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. It's like, okay, wait, that didn't work. That was not obviously a cue. So anyway, there are lots of interactive things around chores, around how you communicate, around even, how you set up dates, or how, even some sexual stuff. There are many of these things. And again, you choose the strategies that are most important or will make the most changes for you. And the way that you figure that out is you figure out what are your target symptoms that you're trying to work on. And that can be ADHD symptoms. It can also be symptoms or behaviors in a relationship that you're trying to work on. And the idea here on the ADHD side is that you will have a fairly large number of symptoms. If you have ADHD, by definition, you won't get diagnosed with ADHD if you only have one or two of them. And so you cannot work on everything all at once. You can only work on a certain number of things. So you pick those symptoms that most get in your way, and you say, okay, those are my 2, maybe 3 target symptoms, and I'm going to work on those. I'm going to select things from leg 1, leg 2, leg 3 that specifically address those issues. So in my relationship, emotional dysregulation was the #1 target symptom, as an example. So my husband took an antidepressant, actually, which was a good behavior moderator for him. It helped him stay calmer. He did a number of behavioral things that he was working on to improve how he brought himself to the relationship. We used verbal cues in leg 3 and a number of other kinds of communication techniques, as well as how I approached him and what I approached him about, and some chore distribution stuff, and et cetera, all aimed at that specific target symptom of getting his emotional dysregulation to not impact our relationship. So that's how optimizing treatment works. You pick your target symptoms, you understand, you get educated about what all of your different options are, and then you apply the ones that are most useful. And that might include, working with a professional or something else. There are many of them. So the impact on the relationships, which I'm talking about, and my first book is called The ADHD Effect on Marriage, so hence the title here, but it's on any adult relationship that's a committed relationship. The number one thing to understand is that there are very, very reliable patterns that show up in these relationships that are specific to the symptoms being there, and then importantly, the responses to those symptoms. It is not just about the ADHD partner. That's not what it's about at all. In fact, typically when I'm working with partners, one of the first places, as soon as I check, what kinds of things are you doing to manage your ADHD and help get that organized, the next thing that I do is usually work with a non-ADHD or sometimes more organized ADHD partner, if you have two people with ADHD, on their responses, because there's a huge amount of leverage there. It doesn't, you can't change the responses if the ADHD partner isn't also making progress very effectively. It doesn't last very long, but you need to work on both sides. So there are misinterpretations of ADHD symptoms, which I'll be talking about in a moment. There's something I call symptom response. Again, I'm going to talk about both of those things together in a moment. There's a lot of imbalance in the relationship, parent-child dynamics, and others. So I'll get to some of these to give you some more information. But importantly, both partners really need to be working on what their contributions are. So let me talk about symptom response, and misinterpretation of symptoms here with a couple of slides. The first thing I'm going to talk about distractibility. This is the number one adult symptom of ADHD, distractibility. It's not hyperactivity. You might have hyperactivity or you might not, but distractibility is a key characteristic. So in a relationship, what happened to my husband and I is classic. He pays attention to whatever's immediate. That's the now, not now thing. And what's interesting, that's the reward focused brain. And everything that comes into his very sort of unfiltered brain feels very equally important. So what he's working on at work, whether or not the car needs to be fixed, whether or not he's got something online that he's interested in, the dog, whatever it is, it all sort of feels the same. And of course, the partner is just one of a lot of pieces of input, if you want to think of it that way. So his symptomatic behavior was he pays attention to what's in front of him. And I was not always in front of him. And so he wasn't paying attention to me. My misinterpretation of that, because we didn't know about the ADHD when we got married, was, gee, my partner's no longer paying attention to me, therefore he doesn't love me, right? There's something that has happened. He's changed his feelings about me. He doesn't love me. And that as a interpretation in a neurotypical relationship could be accurate. You would pay attention to your partner because you want to pay attention to them and you enjoy being with them and you're not distracted by a lot of other stuff. But in an ADHD impacted relationship, it's very, very common that the other partner, the non-ADHD partner, feels lonely in the relationship. That's how I would have described it to you. My way of approaching that, and the classic way of approaching that, is a very human response, which is my partner's not paying enough attention to me, therefore I need to get more attention. And the way you get more attention can be varied. You can buy sexy new lingerie, which I tried, and that didn't work. and you can try, sort of being intrusive, which worked a little bit better. And you can try being mean or managerial. That works even better. And you start to become more aggressive in order to get the attention, which is the point of the relationship, right? To be able to be attended to and to attend to another person. That's why you are together, usually. So eventually my behavior became intrusive enough. And I would say to him, I don't understand, do you love me? And he'd be completely confused. Of course I love you. What are you talking about? And then he'd go off and do his thing again. So eventually my intrusive behavior got to be negative enough that he would then respond to my response, right? So this first line here is the symptom. The first response is my response to that symptom, very human response. And then the second response is his response to my response, also a human response, which is if somebody is chasing you around, eventually you're going to either fight back or escape or avoid or something. And then the conversation becomes about the responses. The more he escapes, the more I try to get his attention, right? Or the more he fights back, the more unhappy I am, and try to get his attention to make things happier, right? So there's this negative reinforcing spiral where the relationship just starts to go south, essentially, and it's very negative. Let me give you another example of symptom response, and to some degree, misinterpretations of symptoms of ADHD. So in this case, and again, I'm starting these examples with ADHD because I'm trying to introduce you to the impact of ADHD, but you can use this format for other things that are coming from the other partner as well. For example, chronic resentment or anger or whatever. You start with the behavior and then you look at the response and the response to response. It's a very useful way to think about the ways you interact as a couple. Okay, so this characteristic behavior is you promise to do something and then you either don't initiate it or you don't complete it. Again, based in ADHD symptoms, it might go into the not now and you forget about it because memory issues are an issue for adults with ADHD. Or you might not know how to plan it. That's an executive function issue also associated with ADHD. Or you might start it and lose interest in it. There are lots of different options, but the bottom line is you don't complete or maybe don't even start the thing that you promised to do. This happens regularly in a relationship. It's a real trust buster in a relationship, so it's problematic in lots of ways. The non-ADHD partner's response to that is my partner is untrustworthy, or my partner is lazy, or my partner doesn't love me. All three of those things are misinterpretations of ADHD behaviors. I don't have time to get into it today, but I have a couple seminar that I give, and I talk about how to rebuild trust and why people with ADHD are not inherently untrustworthy and why they're not lazy and all of that stuff. These are misinterpretations of that. Now, the classic human response to that, particularly if your non-ADHD partner is an organized person, is to take on the responsibilities that the other partner is not doing. And the logic here is it's just easier for me to take on these responsibilities. I just do this much more easily. And at the beginning of the relationship, it's done with a great deal of goodwill and love and et cetera. But over time, as it becomes apparent just how much of the stuff is being handed off to the non-ADHD partner, and particularly after you have children, where there's a lot more organizational stuff that's not very interesting, that's on the list, and that the ADHD partner, particularly if they have undiagnosed or unmanaged ADHD, may have trouble engaging with, then resentments will start to build. And a lot of reminders, did you do this? Why haven't you done that yet, et cetera. And sometimes a great deal of anger. And it depends on how long this has been going on, but typically it's an upward, anger gets more and more and more and more as it doesn't go away. You talk to your partner, and the partner says, sure, I'll do that, no problem. Totally means it. I mean, I would say this to my husband. He'd say, absolutely, I'll do that, no problem. But then, because he didn't know about the ADHD, he didn't have any of those leg 2 management strategies in place in the treatment stuff, because he wasn't treating it. It would just disappear. And it wasn't because he didn't intend to do it. It's because he didn't have the skill set in place, because he didn't know about the ADHD. And that when people come find me, typically they're in a place where their relationship is in great disarray and there's a huge amount of resentment and anger. Sometimes partners are emotionally abusive towards each other. I know I emotionally abused my husband. I was not at all proud of that. But that I just couldn't figure out how to get him to do what he said he was going to do. And it didn't help. It wasn't about whether he wanted to do it. It was about whether he could get his brain organized, his ADHD managed well enough to be able to do it. So anyway, that's the misinterpretation and where it heads to. The ADHD partner's very natural response to that kind of resentment and anger taking over responsibilities is to allow the partner to take over the responsibilities. Logically, why would you not do that? Why would you say yes, continue to say, yes, of course I'll do that, and then fail at it because you're not organized enough to do it and get berated some more, right? So it makes a ton of sense. Say, okay, you can do it, but it diminishes the role of that partner in the relationship. You become childlike in the relationship, dependent on the other person's managerial skills or executive function skills, and angry. You don't want to be bossed around all the time. You don't want to be told that you can't do anything, whatever. And particularly, again, if you don't know that the ADHD is there, it can be become a very toxic relationship. Another one of these negatively reinforcing cycles. Now, the important thing to understand is that if you know that these things are going on, you can change them. In fact, I want to bring you back to the previous slide, the distraction slide. You have this, my part misinterpretation, all this negative stuff going on. If you know about the ADHD and you know distractibility is there and the ADHD partner is working to manage it or whatever, and you start to see that your partner is becoming more distracted from you, you're starting to feel like you're not getting enough attention, you can go to your partner and you can say, gee, I'm feeling like I'm not getting quite enough attention these days. How about if we go out for a date? And off you go for your date, because of course, the partner goes, sure, let's go have some fun together. Off you go for your date. You re-engage with each other, you realize how much you like each other, and the problem is solved, right? What a difference between going into this huge cycle of I'm unloved and I have to go find more attention and all of that stuff, right? So interrupting between the symptom, having a different response to the symptom or a different response to the response is incredibly powerful in terms of changing these relationships. Right? Same thing here. The partner promises to do something and doesn't initiate or complete. The issue is the structure that the ADHD partner needs to create to be able to follow through. That's part of managing ADHD. When you know that, you don't go into the rest of this loop. The ADHD partner says, oh, you know what? I got to work with a coach, or I'm going to work on how to do the following 10 chores every day, maybe a list and a special set of reminders or systems or whatever. And then you don't have the problem anymore. Or maybe you say, okay, we're going to set our chores into silos. We're going to do two different, your strengths are here, my strengths are here. We're going to totally separate out what we do so there's not much interaction on these projects. We can and so each person does what they're strong at. There are lots of different ways to address this. I've only talked about a couple. But again, you can interrupt these symptom response cycles. If you know about the ADHD, if you can interpret it properly, and if you know what the strategies are that work for couples and particularly adults who have ADHD. Okay, I mentioned that the ADHD partner turns into a childlike position. This actually I gave it a name, parent-child dynamics. And I gave it that name because it sounds negative and I want it to sound negative. It is literally one of the singly most destructive things that can happen in a relationship impacted by ADHD. And in this, non-ADHD partners take on too much responsibility. They do my life feels chaotic. It's out of control because there are all these things happening that I don't expect and don't understand. And so they try to wrap their arms around it. They try to get it under control. It's a response to the chaos in their lives. Totally understandable response, but you take on too much responsibility. You become the manager of not only the relationship, but also of the ADHD partner, which does not sit well for either one of you. It's an over-functioning position in the relationship. And it leads to a huge amount of unhappiness and resentment and frustration and anger. The ADHD partner is under-functioning. I used to jokingly, but not so jokingly, call my partner reliably unreliable. you get less responsibility because of the ADHD not being well enough managed. And then you end up in this resentful, unhappy, often quite defiant place. And again, the parent-child thing, the non-ADHD partner is the parent, the ADHD partner is the child. It's like having another teenager. Professionals sometimes sort of look for ADHD when they hear an adult say, I feel like I have another child in my house. And they go like, maybe we should be thinking about ADHD here. It's not positive. It's not sexy. It's not fair to either partner. It is really, truly destructive. And this is one of the very first things that couples typically have to work on if they know about the ADHD. There are a lot of unproductive responses that partners have when they get into parent-child. Non-ADHD partners, sort of generally speaking, I call it win the battle, lose the war. I could go pursue my husband who was distracted and finally get his attention, but the relationship suffered if I did that enough, right? If I had to do that enough, because both of us got angry. And there are all sorts of things about, like the constant critique. Why don't you do it this way? Even if you're trying to be helpful, why don't you do it this way? Oh, this is a better way to do it. Wait, why did you do it that way? Oh, well, I can't believe you did it that way. That's the constant critique, right? And it's very diminishing. You get attention through extreme actions, like this person who says, I yell at my partner because if I don't yell at him, if I don't get right in his face, he completely ignores me. And in fact, I have already not yelled at him several times and he ignored me. So now I'm yelling at him. The bottom line, though, is you're still yelling at him and it's still bad for the relationship. There has to be a different way. For ADHD partners, generally speaking, the responses, the unproductive responses for ADHD partners sort of do a barbell. They cluster at two ends of the scale. Either don't confront the problem because it'll move into the not now and go away, or completely blow it up where you just you scream or you rage or you make it so it's impossible. Stonewalling, extreme anger and aggression, defensiveness, arguing, or total retreat, like not going to be able to deal with you at all. Again, not productive. A relationship is about engaging. It's about engaging in positive ways. These are not positive ways. And in fact, some of these are part of John Gottman, who is a very famous marriage researcher in the US. He has what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And stonewalling is one, contempt is another, defensiveness and denial. I mean, they're all in there. And those are the things that destroy relationships, literally destroy them. There is a different way. I'm going to give you a few examples here and I'm almost done. I want to make sure that I get time for questions. But let me give you an example. So I had a man come to me who said, gee, I can't stand it. My wife, who has ADHD, does her laundry and leaves it in the dryer. Why doesn't she, I want her to come and put her clothes away like regular people do. All right, big red flag. As soon as somebody says regular people, I'm like, I'm all over that one. But he wanted me to tell his partner that that she should be putting her laundry away. And instead, I said to him, gee, it sounds like a really good system because she knows exactly where to find her clean clothes. They are clean and she can get herself out of the house in the morning. Plus, she doesn't have the boring job of trying to figure out which drawers everything goes in and how to fold it perfectly and all that stuff. It's the perfect solution. That was not at all what he wanted to hear. But it's a good example of how your neurochemistry creates different good solutions for the same problem, right? He does it one way, she does it another, they both work. I had another woman with ADHD write to me and tell me that she had real trouble cleaning up her kitchen because she had to do it all the time and it was really boring. So she created excitement by setting a 10-minute kitchen timer and creating a game. So one of the strategies to get yourself to do stuff, if you have ADHD, is to gamify it. That's what this is. And so she'd set the timer and she'd race the timer in terms of cleaning up the kitchen. And her husband at first was like, what are you doing? And then he realized that it was working for her. And he's like, that's great. Maybe you have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Pretty common. People with ADHD are often night owls, and they don't wake up very graciously in the morning. We have a rule in our household, which is I'm not allowed to talk to my husband until he's got at least a cup of coffee in him, because he's not good in the morning at all. So you might have to set multiple alarms to get yourself out of bed. And in fact, one of the strategies is to set an alarm across the room, a really obnoxious one across the room. There's also another one, I believe, that will jump around that you have to capture to turn it off, things like that. Verbal cue. I talked about the verbal cue for de-escalating or keeping a conversation from escalating, which is aardvark. But you can also have a verbal cue where the partner says, hey, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, right? We need to stop talking right now. That's inside the person who has the ADHD, and it's invisible to the other partner. So it's a very effective cue, because otherwise, when you're feeling overwhelmed, you get very quiet or distant. You try to back away from the thing that feels overwhelming. And what your partner might interpret that is you haven't heard them, right? And so they push harder. That's not the right, that's not a good communication. Many couples who have chore issues in their relationship can benefit from a weekly task coordination meeting. The meeting is not a parent giving things to a child. It is the two of you sitting down and figuring out what has to be done, when it's going to get done, what are the elements of that thing, and then leaving it be for the week and coming back the next week and seeing, okay, what got done, what didn't, and then going from there. Maybe there's a weekly time that you set aside. One of the things that my husband and I did, which was a good meshing of the way we like to do things, is we had a period of time, a couple of years, where our son came down for Saturday afternoon rehearsals in Boston. We happened to live in the Boston area at the time. And rather than having one of us stay home and doing chores or whatever, we decided we would both drive down to Boston, and we would have a 3-hour window where we would do something together, sort of a Saturday afternoon date. And what we did was we blocked out the 3 hours. So this is my style, right? I block it out and I plan it. But we didn't figure out what it was we were going to do until we got downtown to Boston. Then we'd open up the computer and see, what's going on. Is there a crafts fair or a museum exhibit or a coffee shop or a bike race or something fun that we wanted to do? So that was the spontaneous side, which was very appealing to my husband, right? Again, two different ways to do it, but they work together to give you that together time, that attention time, to counteract the distractibility that is in adult ADHD. So living with ADHD means that both of you commit to being your best self. There are certain kinds of behaviors that you absolutely positively have to have in your relationship, like respect, including each other, time to express that you love each other, empathy for each other, which you need to understand each other to be able to be empathetic, and partners versus this parent-child dynamic or whatever. I talk in my seminar about conflict intimacy skills. I'm not going to get into that, but it is really important to take the time to learn about adult ADHD and relationships. There are many things that you might be struggling with that you do not need to struggle with, but you do need, in order to stop struggling, to understand. And one of those is that you cannot change your partner. You are responsible for yourself and responsible for your own behavior. So when you look at this list at the top here, which is the must-have behaviors, those are about you. Me being respectful to my husband, me being inclusive and inviting my husband to join me with stuff, me giving, making sure my husband understands that I love him, and vice versa, right? Him being respectful of me. He's in control of whether he's respectful of me. And if he's not, if he's getting really agitated or something like that, we need to work on figuring out how do we make that happen. So I'm going to give you a couple of resources here. So I have a ton of information at my website, which is the ADHDmarriage.com website. There's a lot of information there. If you want to read the blog, go to the Start Here first. There's a Start Here, which is sort of some good basic overview information and my favorites. I do give a couple seminar 3 times a year. So some people from the UK and from the Eurozone do take it while I give it live, but they listen to the recordings like this is being recorded. The reason they do that is so they get the weekly meetings and the schedule to keep them on track. But the time shift is such that you just cannot actually take it live. So you would still be listening to the recordings, which means that if you're able to get yourself motivated and you're interested in it, you can also just do the self-study, which is the full recording time I gave it. I just finished giving it about a month ago, so it's a really recent recording. 2 books. The first one is the red one. The second one is the purple and green one. The second one is more in depth about stuck areas that people really struggle with, like parent-child dynamics and chores and things like that. The first one gives you the overview. So that's the better place to start with the red one. I give non-ADHD partner support groups, some of which are in a time zone shift that works very well for people who are in your area. I also have a list of coaches and counselors. There's also psychiatryuk.com. So if you haven't gotten an evaluation yet, but you think you might like it, that's an opportunity to get a relatively fast one. All right, so I want to open it up for Q&A. That's just a very sort of introductory, I sort of get you stimulated and thinking about ADHD and that it has a huge impact, but I want to answer your questions. And I think somebody will come on. Hi, Ken.
How's it going? Is Nicola doing the question? Nicola there, yeah?
Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, thanks, Melissa. That was fantastic. Lots of interesting stuff there, and the overlap with the kind of the child, the idea of the child and the teenager. I think that's very interesting altogether. A totally different angle on it. We have quite a few questions here to get through. Absolutely. One of them, everyone will go through the questions anyway, but there's one in particular here just about. Can you speak from Alison? Can you speak about the differences between males and females with ADHD? So she's recently diagnosed female, and many of the examples were more male. So she's just trying to see, is there much of a difference when the ADHD partner is a female?
There is. So there are a lot of cultural expectations around how women should perform in general, and also, at least in the United States, and I'm not sure what happens with you, but the distribution of chores in the United States is heavily oriented towards women, and that's the sort of most boring part of and least structured part of your lives, and so that is particularly stressful for women who have ADHD. And I know the research suggests, at least over in the US, that even if the male partner in a heterosexual relationship is unemployed and the female is employed, the female is still doing more of the chores. So that's a huge stressor. And one of the unfortunate downsides is that it is more likely that a relationship will head towards separation or even divorce faster if the woman has ADHD, because there's less tolerance in their male partners than the reverse. There are a number of good resources to find out more about women and ADHD. There's a woman named Sari Solden, SariSolden, and she has some good programs and also a good book on the pressures that are specific to women with ADHD. There's also a coach and expert named Linda Roggli, Roggli. She's on the East Coast, and she might do some programs that would translate well in the time zone shift that you could participate in. And she's also a good resource. And finally, there's a woman named Kathleen Nadeau, Nadeau, I think, who also has written a book about women with ADHD. So those are all good resources. It's well worth taking a look at it. There are also some issues around menopause and some other kinds of things as well. So it's not just social, but also physiological.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Right, okay, from the US, we'll go across to Ken in Dublin.
Thanks very much for that. Just very quickly, there was one comment in there, and it was from Vanessa, was saying, she had put in a question, but she put in an additional comment, says, this is possibly the best talk I've ever heard on ADHD ever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Professor. But just, I was going to go with the simple question from you, and I'll leave everybody else for the more difficult questions. But you talked about there, having a male partner with ADHD and a female partner with ADHD. But the question for you is that what difficulties would a couple who both have ADHD encounter?
So we have one of those in my family, and it's interesting to watch. So if you might have very different types of ADHD. For example, one of you might be very emotionally dysregulated and the other person not so much, or whatever. You might be managing it differently. So every situation will be different. But generally speaking, what I suggest is both of you should do your best possible job of managing your ADHD, just to make your lives easier. B, you should delegate as much as you can. So my daughter, who has ADHD, is 30, and I have said, look, you just have to think of getting a person to come in to clean your home every other week as a basic expense, just like food or something, because it's that critical to their relationship. Unfortunately, again, there's some gender expectations. Things will fall on her, and it's very hard for her to do a lot of this stuff. And so you just don't want that pressure. So things that you can get rid of, if possible, might be filing, it might be house cleaning, it might be, I don't know what else, other kinds of things. So don't be ashamed to ask for help or to delegate, and also learn to say no. Learn to say, no, we're not going to take on that extra thing. I don't have the bandwidth for it. That's a perfectly okay thing. Yes, of course, I'll do it. And then having way too many things and whatever. Now, the upside of it is that I know I'm watching my daughter and her relationship with great interest. They both are complete and total slobs. They know they're total slobs. I mean, there's stuff everywhere. They arrive at my house, it's like there's an explosion went off. And they are fine with it. Neither one of them sees it particularly. They do clean up before the house cleaner comes, so that they're not living in filth. But so there are some positives as well in terms of what they're used to in this level of chaos, and how supportive they are of each other as well. So pros and cons, I think.
Just for your sake, I think jumping on you. Just a very quick one. There was a SK who's actually joining us from Texas, and says, maybe when you were talking about an aardvark, you meant an armadillo.
Oh, maybe. You're right. The armadillo is the Texas thing and the aardvark is somewhere else, but aardvark is the word we use. You are absolutely right. I'm glad you called me on that, because aardvark are those guys, and the armadillos are round guys with plates.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Sorry.
Well, we have people from Texas here tonight, so
it's good.
I'm on the ground to put it straight.
Always happy to be straightened out, for sure.
Right, we'll go on to Tricia there. I definitely think that cleaner, I think that is absolutely the best piece of advice anyone's ever given someone with ADHD. You're actually after given the right to go home and say, yeah, cleaner's coming in. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Tricia.
Okay, this one says, my son has ADHD. In the course of finding it out, I have realized that my husband also has ADHD. And what you said about relationships and the anger on my part really resonated. We have been married a long time and I have thought about leaving many times but have not. Would it serve any purpose to bring up the possibility of ADHD with my husband? He has taken little interest in our son's diagnosis. I don't know if this is because he's not interested or if he thinks he might be out and is waiting for me to bring it up.
Or he might be fearful of the idea that, so one of the resistance places for adults with ADHD is they think that if they engage with, have the possibility of having ADHD, that people are going to blame them for all the problems. So if you've been struggling, if there's a lot of anger or whatever, the classic sort of mutual denial in these relationships is that the ADHD partner says, if you would just be less angry, everything would be fine. And the non-ADHD partner says, if you would just fix the ADHD or fix those symptoms, that they don't know that it's ADHD, everything would be fine. And neither one of those is accurate on their own. You both have to fix your own stuff. So ADHD is heritable. It's highly heritable. It is as heritable as eye color and hair color. So it's highly likely if you have a kid with ADHD that you have at least one adult in the family with ADHD. It's more than a 50% chance that that's the case. So that might be one way to bring it up. Hey, I've been learning about this. This looks very familiar. There is a ton of really good news about how we could manage things if in fact we've discovered that you have ADHD. You could even say, look, we don't even need the evaluation. We can start doing some of these things because they're good marriage advice anyway. And without labeling it that, which sometimes when somebody who is highly suspected of having ADHD is resistant to the label, that's some of the advice I give is just start doing things like, some of the non-medicinal sides of how to improve things and the verbal cues and et cetera. So one way that people sometimes get their partner interested is they take that red book, the first one, the ADHD Effect on Marriage, and there's a chapter in there on the patterns, like the parent-child dynamic that I talked about, the misinterpretation of symptoms. There are like 9 or 12, I can't remember the number, patterns. And they find patterns in that chapter that are particularly descriptive of their relationship. And you'll read like a paragraph. Hey, listen to this. This sounds like eerily like us. And you read a paragraph of a couple of them, including make sure one that points to you, not just at your partner. And I've had quite a few people say that their partner sort of turned around and went, oh my God, that sounds just like us, and that got them interested. So a soft approach is better than I know you have ADHD and you need to go fix it approach. Remember that reward focused brain. Stuff feels good is much more likely to be engaged with than stuff that doesn't feel good, particularly when ADHD is unmanaged.
Very good.
But it's always, sorry, let me just add one thing. It's always worth getting that topic out front and center because the changes that you can make, the improvements you can make are so dramatic that sit back and be fearful of the response doesn't serve you or your partner or your relationship as well as it could.
Okay, that I think we're getting this talk has definitely brought a lot of different questions, a lot of people that are really interested in this. There's different dynamics here. You talked about them in the very beginning, but we have Thomas here, and he's asking, what are your thoughts when the non-ADHD partner has high function autism, and would it work similarly with the neurotypical non-ADHD partner, or would it be more?
Well, I mean, autism will bring some challenges. In that case, I think if possible, I'd probably want to work with a professional if you could find one that understands both things, and also try to be very overt about the communication between the two of you, which means that some of the work that's going to have to go on in this particular couple that you're in is about making it a neutral or positive topic for both of you. So it's not a, gee, you're to blame. You have to really work hard to move away from the idea that there's blame, but rather, hey, here's who you are, here's who I am, here's the qualities of each of these things that we've been diagnosed with. And how do we work together to, really focus in on our strengths and what we do well to bring the best of ourselves to that relationship. So neutralizing the ADHD, unlike the last person where there's, I think, a likelihood because of the way the question was asked that there's a fear that the person's going to be really negative about hearing about ADHD, try to really make it a real positive from the standpoint of, hey, we know what we're dealing with here. There are so many things that can be done, and let's work on incorporating all of the strategies for both the autism management as well as the ADHD management. So a few extra challenges there, but the high functioning autistic person is probably more organized and more, more along the dimensions of the non-ADHD person, but not completely.
Okay. This very much is an international webinar here because we're going to head across to Terry in the UK. So, hey, Terry.
So, Anonymous here. How do you avoid being a parent when your partner's ADHD causes them to endanger you, leaving the gas on, and themselves, accidental injuries, create huge financial problems, lose jobs, etc., and medication causes cardiac problems?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. This is one of the struggles for non-ADHD partners, is it seems like it's a lose-lose some of the time. There is a longer path for that couple. Sounds like they've already gotten some trying of medication and can't do it. There are other non-stimulant medications which might be okay with the heart issues. Like Wellbutrin, which is what my husband took. I'm not sure what the UK name is for it, but it's an antidepressant, and some others that are used that wouldn't, that you should work with your doctor on that, but also download that treatment ebook, because it'll talk about other things, maybe sleep disturbance issues or mindfulness training or some other things that can help improve that ADHD. So the underfunctioning for that person, that there's a lack of attentiveness, for example, if they're leaving on the stove or doing things that are dangerous, the bad driving is so highly correlated with adult ADHD that there was conversation about including it in the diagnostic criteria for diagnosing ADHD. That's how strongly correlated it is. So, one of the solutions for that is to not have that person drive as much if both of you are in the car. So there are ways to approach this. Is again, once the talk around the ADHD is not deemed to be loaded with emotional content so much. Essentially, the bottom line is you as a non-ADHD person are not in control of what the ADHD person is doing. So you are in the role of asking or requesting, but also there are certain boundaries that you do need to put in place for being in a healthy relationship. And so I talk about that in the first book. And I'm creating actually now a presentation on setting boundaries for the November CHAD conference. It's a really important area of understanding what's really, really important to you, what must you have, and where do you just draw a line. I'll give you one example, and around safety is one of those areas. Medication taking for children, for example, or buckling car seats into cars. Both of those things have potentially really negative downsides if medication is left out and a child takes a lot of medication they shouldn't take, or they are in a car accident and the car seat's not buckled in or whatever. There are certain things where the safety is such an overriding issue that you actually create rules in the household that just says it's not worth having that partner potentially have a problem with that thing. So it's this sort of combination of doing things. There are things that the partner just doesn't do, like give medication to children or leave medications out. There are things that they learn to do better through whatever the management techniques are that they are capable of using, and they take responsibility for making sure that they do that they don't give up. And maybe the partner needs a coach or something. When you have a forgetfulness issue, there may be a memory issue, which is very hard to address, or it may be a mindfulness and attention issue, which can be addressed with mindfulness training. So again, there are strategies for most of this stuff. Working with a professional who knows what the options are can be useful. And some of this is online now. I don't know if that exactly answered the question. I hope it did.
Thank you. Hannah, are we going across to by the seaside?
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks very much, Melissa. It was a wonderful, wonderful webinar. There's a message here from Jessie, who is asking, would you have any tips for how to prepare for the courtship stage coming to an end in a long distance relationship?
Yeah, so the distance may make that last a little longer. One of the things that I advise people who are either in a relationship with a person with ADHD or who have ADHD themselves is do not commit to the relationship until that courtship phase has ended. As I said, it ends for 97% of people are good. So usually that's, don't commit into the relationship for at least 3 years. I think the way to prepare for it is to understand what the patterns look like so that when you start to get into them, you can say, wait, hold on. That's that pattern where I'm mistaking your distractibility for an idea that you don't love me or care about me or whatever. And now I know that we should be talking about this openly. And also you should be working on your distractibility. How do we create ways to pay attention to each other? Like this 3 hours on Saturday afternoons that my husband and I were doing. That was a fabulous way to pay attention to each other. So there are things like that you can put into your relationship before the problems become severe. So knowing what these I would get a copy of my first book and read it so that you're familiar with what the patterns are, so that you can identify them when they start to happen and intervene immediately.
Thank you. Ken, do you want to?
I'm going to go off piste here and probably get myself into a little bit of trouble for this question. It hasn't come up in the questions. I'm the only male person here tonight. And this is how men think. Let's be honest about it. And we've talked about the challenges that go with ADHD, but there's also the other side. People with ADHD can be very imaginative. People with ADHD can be very creative. People with ADHD can be very passionate. People with ADHD have the hyperactivity. Let's be honest. When it comes to sex, ADHD is going to be better.
Well, yeah, sex is actually a little more complicated than that. So, yeah.
This is a man talking, Melissa.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, there are a fair number, larger number of people with ADHD than in the general community who actually have lower than average sex drives. So it's different. But you're right. There's a lot of positives. And one of the things I talk about in my seminar is what Ned Hallowell calls mirror traits of ADHD. The high energy that attracted me to my husband, his creativity, his ability to, to just go off and do stuff spontaneously, it's part of why I care about him, right? Those things are wonderful. And those are directly connected to his ADHD. Now, on the other hand, when he's spontaneous, we've been married for 25 years and he's spontaneous about something we've talked about 14 times that he wasn't supposed to do, but he went off and did anyway, then that's not so much fun. So there are these sort of mirror traits that sometimes feel very positive and sometimes don't. Distractibility and creativity are tightly linked. The ability to have your attention drawn to new and interesting areas that's what being creative is all about, right? And yet distractibility in the household where you're trying to get something done or you're trying to get your partner to pay attention to you, not so good. So there's a new book out by Ned Hallowell and John Rady. They just released it called ADHD 2.0. And these guys are sort of, the gurus on ADHD. It talks beautifully about the conundrums of adult ADHD, about the things that are very positive that also have these, the person can do this, but they also do this, which is totally nonsensical. And some of that offset, as well as the latest on treatment and et cetera. So it's a really good book for anybody who's interested in finding out more about ADHD. But you're absolutely right. I'm talking about the issues that come up because the people that I work with usually are in a struggling situation with their relationship, but there are a lot of positives as well. And I wouldn't be with my husband still if there weren't a ton of positives, because there have also been some negatives. So it's good to mention them for sure.
Tricia?
Okay, this is an anonymous attendee. I've been with my husband for 20 years. He was diagnosed last year after me pushing for him to get an assessment for a number of years. He refuses to engage in any interventions, and only in the past if I say I've had enough, but that doesn't last long at anything. I just feel totally exhausted by him now, but feel guilty if I leave. When is it okay to go? The temper, anger outbursts are starting to affect our kids now.
Yeah, so it's interesting. That's ADHD typically doesn't in itself cause divorce, because there are so many strategies that you can use to manage ADHD. And the majority of people who take on that task can do so quite effectively. What causes divorce is denial. And that's on the part of either partner. If a non-ADHD partner says, hey, I can be as angry as I want to, you've earned it, and I'm not going to do anything about it, that's just as destructive as if the ADHD partner says, no, I have ADHD, but I don't have to do anything about it, love it or leave it. It's the denial that causes the divorce. So that situation, that partner is in denial that he has to do something in order for the relationship to heal. Otherwise, it will end. I will say, this is going to sound strange coming from me, but that couple might want to try my live seminar if he's willing to engage with it, because the seminar is structured to get people to move out of their chronic thought patterns and into new ones. It might not make a difference for him. He might be feeling too defensive or whatever. But at least it would give them a sense, if they could both go through it, of whether or not the relationship is salvageable. If he gets through the seminar and he's still saying, I'm not going to do diddly do, it's not, that relationship's going to end. And it should, by the way, if it is that unhappy and that angry and that disconnected, not every relationship should continue. It needs to have the bottom line things that I was talking about a couple slides ago, that are the bottom line for staying in a relationship: respect, the ability to express affection, etc. The confusing thing is that a lot of these relationships are really dysfunctional, and then mine was totally, and many of them can be repaired, some of them cannot. So that seminar is a good way to find out whether there's potential light at the end of the tunnel or not. And I don't say that just to sell you a seminar. If you need financial assistance, send me an email. That's not the point. The point is, it's just a really good resource. And it's not very expensive either, but I'm happy to help if you need it.
Thank you. Hannah, we'll go back to you.
Yeah.
Side.
There's a question here from Lausine. My apologies if I've read that name wrong, but they're saying, hi, I have many neurodivergences. Bipolar, anxiety, autism, dyspraxia are the ones relevant to this question. I'm currently courting a lovely guy with ADHD. We've been on a couple of magnificent dates and I'll be asking him to be my boyfriend soon. I do have a concern though. I'm very comfortable in routines. I like structure and predictability. Can you suggest ways to maintain excitement and interest? I enjoy spontaneity, but find it daunting to go with the flow. I generally prefer to plan the dates.
That's gonna, yeah, there's some sort of inherent tensions in that combination. So I would say that the structure that I had talked about for those Saturday afternoon times might be a way that you could bridge that difference, where you set aside specific times to be together in a so that the plan is in place, 3 hours on Saturday afternoon, but the specifics of that plan in terms of what you're going to do maybe is more go with the flow, or more easier to do. I think that that you're going to need to communicate very clearly what it is you need. And this would be one of those relationships I would definitely say you should, even if it feels wonderful, you should not commit to a long-term relationship until you're out of the hyper-focused courtship. Because if the dopamine levels lead that partner to be highly attentive, the dopamine levels might also lead that person to be better at planning and whatever. And you might not really know what you're getting into until he goes back, or he or she, I'm not sure you said which, goes back down to the more normal low dopamine levels. So minimum of 3 years of dating this person before you commit. Just make yourself a note, write it somewhere, remind yourself, no matter how good it feels, wait until you know for sure. Because there's some sort of interesting neurological differences that are going to place tension on this relationship.
Okay. And that's a good
Which
tip,
doesn't mean, by the way, does not mean it won't succeed. It just means that there's that there are additional issues that that you'll face, is all.
That's a good tip for every couple, just to wait 3 years.
Yeah.
A lot of people are jumping into it, especially COVID. Terry, are we going to cross the water to you again?
Yep, cool. So one from Alison. Can you speak briefly on how to manage the manic hyperactive part of ADHD? I often take on way too much when I'm on a high and have a total burnout meltdown. And my non-ADHD husband is stuck picking up the pieces.
Yeah, so manic is usually a word that's used with bipolar rather than ADHD. The hyperactivity with ADHD is typically fairly consistent. And so I would want to double check that, in fact, you have the right diagnosis, just from the way you asked that question. But maybe you're talking about intense times of intense interest and then burning yourself out because you're not slowing down enough, or you don't have the continued energy. But I'm a little wary of the way of what you're describing, to be honest with you. And you have to be very careful, because ADHD and bipolar do not, the medications for ADHD can set off bipolar episodes of mania. And so you don't want to get those diagnoses wrong. So you definitely want to double check that one. I think maybe in terms of it's more about, it's about managing yourself in this situation. And I don't know, maybe you need a structure of some sort. To be honest with you, I've never been asked this question in this way before. Maybe there's a structure or something that you can use where you limit yourself, sort of like the woman who is racing the alarm, except in reverse. You set an alarm to stop, so that you're not just using this like manic energy or hyperfocus, as you're calling it, energy to get things done, but you actually stop and slow down a bit. I'm not exactly sure how, I've never confronted that particular question before, which is saying something, because I've been doing this for a long time, so.
Yeah, well, you see, you're going to get them from here. You see, you're going to get the questions. We have Dylan here, and he's saying, defensiveness for my ADHD partner is the main problem in their relationship. And do you have any specific tips on how to deal with this?
Yeah, so defensiveness is often a response that one has because there's an emotion that you don't want to engage with. So thinking back about the reward focused brain, one of the emotions that many people with ADHD carry around with them is shame. And shame feels horrible to engage with. And so rather than, if I go to my husband and say, you didn't do XYZ again, he might become very defensive about it, because the other option is to say, yeah, I failed again. All right, you're right, I didn't do it again, I failed again. So look beneath the defensiveness, maybe with the help of a professional, I'm not sure, or just with in calm times when you're not talking about a specific incident or crisis. Look beneath it to see if you can find out what's underneath. It may well be shame. And there, then the issues are, how do you not trigger that shame? Can you talk about your request in a way that's you focused instead of them focused, as an example, if that's an issue? Or can you create times, like I do what I call the preamble sometimes, where I'll set it up slowly as sort of a soft start, to use John Gottman's language. I'll say to my husband, I know the thing that I'm about to talk to you about might trigger you. But I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks. I can't manage to make it go away for myself. And so it's important that I am able to express it. So can we sit down right now? And can you promise me to remain as open as possible to what I'm saying? And that sets him up to be able to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to try really hard to stay in this and not feel defensive. Another way to approach it, a different way to approach it, is I referred before to what's called conflict intimacy skills. This is a specific type of conversational structure, kind of conversational skill set that you build, where the speaker is very careful not to be aggressive, and aggression takes many forms in conversation, not just yelling or anger. And the listener agrees not to be defensive. And in that situation, if you're starting to feel defensive, you can feel it in your body. You might use a cue. Maybe you raise your hand, or you literally say, I'm starting to feel defensive or something, and you can calm the relationship back down before it gets to be negative. It is something you can learn to manage if you are the person who's feeling defensive, but it's very useful to look underneath it to see what the thing is that's driving that defensiveness. That's the way ultimately that you're going to be able to address it.
Thanks very much. Ken, we go back to you. Oh,
Unmute is the
there
thing you
you
need
are.
to tell me there. Just very quickly, just before we go to the next question, we just ran a very quick poll there. So what we know about the audience tonight, it is about 50% are in a relationship with someone who has ADHD, and 50% are here because they have ADHD and they're also in a relationship. But probably the interesting question was, the question was, I love what ADHD brings to our relationship. 30% went, oh yes. However, 77% went, oh no. So it's probably that what we can find there is that much more people are having difficulties with their relationship because of the ADHD. The next question just comes from, it's quite an ADHD question, I thought, and it comes from an anonymous attendee. So should a person with ADHD try to dial down their distractibility? I live with a partner who more often than not wears headphones while listening to podcasts around the house, and they say I find myself locked out from easy communications.
Okay, so it's unclear from that question whether that's a person with ADHD or a person who isn't, who's wearing the headphones. And before I answer the specific question, I will say one of the strategies for focusing better when you have ADHD is listening to music or listening to something. So you'll get a lot of that going on. So I think this is a little bit like the distractibility symptom response thing that I was talking about, where the partner is feeling, lonely, essentially. Let's use that word. And you need to address that overtly, which is totally love that you're doing all these podcasts, but let's either make it a shared activity while you're, bopping around the kitchen or whatever it is, if we're in the same room, so that we can both hear the same thing and talk about it. Or let's limit it to certain times of day, or certain, either we're not together or in the car or whatever it is, so that there is an adequate amount of time of together time. And some people, phones are another issue where people are on their phones, they're texting all the time, and the phone feels as if, yes, exactly, as if it's more important than the partner. And so there are lots of couples will like say, okay, the cell phones get put into a drawer from the hours of 5 to 8 p.m. or something like that, so that they can't be interfering with the engagement that the couple's having. Engagement is what it's all about. And so whatever it is that's getting in the way of the engagement between the two of you needs to be looked at.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it just seems to be communication is the one thing that needs to be addressed from both the ADHD and the ADHD partner and the non-ADHD partner. Tricia.
Okay, this is an anonymous Day says, I was diagnosed at 9 with ADHD impulsive type. I'm 20-year-old female, and my boyfriend tends to get really frustrated at me because I always make the same mistakes and jump to conclusions when I'm emotional. Any advice for both of us?
Well, it's good that you recognize it. I would say, first of all, download the treatment ebook to make sure that you're doing all of the things possible to manage that. Impulsivity is something that sometimes can be managed medicinally, if you're up for that, with antidepressants or something like that. That was one of the tools that my husband used, or with mindfulness. So there may be a way to improve the ability to manage the impulsivity and sort of slow yourself down to think more carefully about what you're doing. The repetitive nature of ADHD that you mentioned, your partner's getting frustrated because the same things keep happening over and over again, is part of ADHD, but the better it's managed, the less it's part of ADHD. You can become aware of the things that you do over and over again and create structures that allow you to not do them as frequently. And sometimes those structures are between the two partners. If my husband forgets always, because he doesn't care about it, to clean the countertops after he does dishes, one of the solutions for that is for him to do the dishes and for me to do the countertops. I still benefit because I hate doing dishes, but I don't actually mind doing countertops. And then that takes away that friction, rather than require him to do something that he's just never going to do well. So there are a number of different approaches. I think that the impulsivity, I think there needs to be some, so that's that's the bicycle brakes on the race car brain thing. And again, I think the two things that work the best are either medication or mindfulness. And I think those were the things. There is a book called the ADHD, the Mindfulness Prescription for ADHD by a woman named Lydia Zalowski. And that's a good way. It has a soundtrack, I think, with it. I'm not sure if it's online now or if it's just on CD and comes with the book, but to help you learn mindfulness. There's also a website with very short mindfulness training things on it called Mindfully ADD. 3-minute, 4-minute ways to start to train yourself to be more mindful. A lot of people say meditation can help. I mean, this is your responsibility to manage this. If it is getting in the way, it is your symptoms, while your partner can also do the kinds of strategies like my partner and I use to try to make sure that impulsivity doesn't get in the way. So.
Just along that, Melissa, you mentioned the treatment ebook there again. There's a few people who just want to ask again where they find that.
At my website, which is ADHDmarriage.com. It's on the homepage in the right-hand column. You may have to scroll down a little bit to get it, but easy to download.
Great, thank you.
That's great, Melissa. We're actually going a little over time, but we've got questions here and we're just going to try and get through them all. Will we head over to Terry?
Right, so one here. What do you think about a couple where the non-ADHD partner is the one who doesn't engage out of being tired of the ADHD partner's doings? How is it possible to regain the trust?
Yeah, that's one coping strategy. And it's also sometimes, and you'd have to take a look if you're this person to see if you're doing this. It's sometimes a strategy that's used to try to force the ADHD partner into a certain course of action, a manipulative strategy, if you want to use a negative word for it. So you want to take a careful look at sort of what the motivation is behind it. So as a temporary strategy, sometimes disengaging from chaos is useful. More useful, I find, is assessing what it is that you as a non-ADHD partner really need out of the relationship and honing in on that. So, and I suggest to people, pick 2 or maybe 3 things that are really important to you and make sure that you lobby for those specific things in the relationship. So for me, those things are respectful behavior. These are just, you could choose anything, right? These are the things that I've chosen just as an example. Respectful behavior, honesty, and attentiveness or attention/love. Nothing in there. So those are my 3, right? None of that has to do with chores or about following through on things or whatever. Realizing that those were the 3 things that I really needed to feel good in my relationship allowed me to let go of some of the other things that were frustrating me because I was trying to get the perfect relationship and to live more aligned with the things that I truly value. So that's one approach, is to think through what are your top things, top values, and then what falls out under those values and what doesn't. As well, as far as trustworthiness is, again, I covered this in detail in the seminar, but trustworthiness is about the ADHD partner managing their ADHD. And that means a whole bunch of things. Not only does it mean being able to only promise what you know you can do, right? So the ability to say, no, I'm not going to do that is just as important as the ability to say yes and follow through on it. It's the ability to own what it is you have maybe made a mistake on. You know, I told you I was going to do it on Tuesday. It's now Wednesday. I didn't get to it. My new plan is I'm going to get to it by Friday at noon. And then I'm going to also work with my ADHD coach to make sure that I don't run into that same problem over and over again, right? So it's taking responsibility for the ADHD and addressing those things that are important to address, while also holding up your hand and saying, look, I can't address everything. And, you know, I'm not going to do the following things. I know you want me to do 10 things this week. I only have time for 2. And negotiating what that looks like, because each person has the right to define what they can and can't do, and et cetera. And then you figure out from there how to handle it. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. And it actually can be finished the webinar as well, because on that note, we will finish up. That's great information. And we've had lots and lots of messages through saying it was really interesting, one of the best they've seen. And we hope to have you back again, Melissa, because this is definitely a topic that's getting a lot of traction, and we know it's an issue. We see it all the time.
It's a huge issue, yeah. And I will say, so I take a sabbatical in the summer. So right now I'm a little bit hard to get hold of, but in the fall I'm back at work, and you can contact me through the website. I have a contact form. I do try eventually within a few weeks. Sometimes it takes that long to answer the questions that come to me. And of course, people in the seminar get to ask every question they've got that's part of the seminar. And I try to get those back it's an 8-week long thing. So I do want to engage with people in whatever way makes sense for them. I try really hard to answer all the questions I can. So thank you for having me. And thank you for everybody who stayed on, which is most everybody. So.
And most everybody is right. And thanks very much. We will have a recording of the webinar again. It'll be up on our website, and so everybody they can read through all the slides in their own time, but hope to see you again, and thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you again when we're our next webinar. Just to let everyone know, we do have a partners group and a women's group starting in the beginning of each month. And obviously we've loads of other groups. Everything that we do is through our website. And if you check us out on ADHDireland.ie, we have an events page that's regularly kept up to date, and we have events on weekly. We have a large conference coming up in October, and we have several of the webinars coming over the rest of the year as well. So keep an eye on us on ADHDireland.ie events. Lovely to see you all. Thank you very much, Melissa. Thanks to the team, guys.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks. Bye-bye.
We'll see you all again.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye now.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll
knock it off the recording.
Yep. Oh, if you do that as well. Okay.